Okay, everybody, welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. We have some election updates. We are in the midterm election cycle, but we had a primary in Texas, a primary runoff, and we also had one a couple weeks ago in Louisiana. I talked about that already. And next week we have the governor's race in California. So we have the primary. So I brought Joe back on the show, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on. So welcome back.
Thank you. All right, so I think we agreed to start with redistricting. So I can tell you that I am pretty sure that we are done with redistricting for 2026. Um,
Yay!
Georgia, yeah, I know, right? It's been a horrible, almost exactly a year since Texas redrew its map and kind of kicked off this whole disaster. So I will say that Georgia and Maryland may do redistricting this year, but it won't take effect until 2028. But the maps for the 2026 election appear to be set, unless there's some like unexpected court ruling or court packing or anything like that, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. So the from my calculations, the most likely net effect of redistricting is going to be a Republican gain of 7 seats. Uh, it doesn't impact control of the House too much because we were certainly expecting Democrats to win the House by more than 7 seats, but it certainly is going to cut down their margin. And if the Republicans like improve their standing overall, they could maybe have a chance, but it doesn't look like they're improving as of now, at least.
hmm And then for viewers who don't tune into this regularly like we do, Virginia had a map where they were supposed to net, I believe, 4 congressional seats, and that would have cut the Republicans their gains down to 3, but that was struck down by the court for reasons that most people probably don't care about. It could take effect later. And then what I'll also say is when we say net 7, we say net on the presidential election results. So that would be assuming everything else is the same and there is no swing at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit subjective. I try to be like the most like agnostic of whether it's a blue wave or a red wave or a neutral year. That's where kind of 7 comes from. So like Democrats might do better. They probably will do better than that number, even on the redrawn maps, just because like for example, in Texas, there are several competitive House seats that like were gerrymandered. Some of them, well, remember, and the other thing to remember is that Texas was gerrymandered before. They just did it even more because they were feeling more confident about their standing because Trump did better in Texas this time. So but some of the seats are still like somewhat vulnerable. And the Virginia thing was kind of like the biggest blow to Democrats. The Voting Rights Act decision, Calais versus Louisiana, that was kind of like the other one. That's really the two things that are really helping Republicans. Because if not for those two things, Democrats basically would have like there would have basically been no change because it would have mostly just been Texas, California, Utah, and then like one or two others, and it would have been basically a wash. Um, but now California is the only state that Democrats redrew, and then Utah was a court redrawn because the Republican gerrymander was declared illegal. So the Virginia map being struck down, yeah, it's basically a loss of 4. I still think they're actually going to win at least one and maybe two of the seats that they like drew out because 2 of them were competitive already. The one is the Virginia second, which is kind of a classic swing seat, which I think the Democrats are very likely to win because they're doing so well. And then the other one is a Richmond-based seat that's a little bit Republican leaning, but pretty vulnerable because of the environment as well. But the Virginia map was struck down on procedural grounds. The map itself is legal, so we might see it come back in 2028. But that was kind of the big blow to Democrats was the Virginia map going down. But I don't think control of the House is too in doubt, even though Republicans got a kind of near best case scenario. So I guess we can kind of transition to talking about the House.
hmm
Um, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I guess yeah, lastly, what about Florida? Are they redrawing or is it too late for that?
No, Florida did redraw. I think it was like a month ago.
Oh, you can see.
I
Yeah,
their
you think
map
I would
is
know this, but
illegal. The Florida map is illegal, but the Supreme Court of Florida is controlled by Republicans, and they seem to just be willing to not enforce the Constitution of Florida. in order to draw Republican seats, which is a little crazy, but that's what it appears doing because there is a constitutional amendment in Florida that like bans partisan gerrymandering and has requirements for compactness and stuff, which the 2022 map, which was still gerrymandered, but like not as bad, like really not nearly as bad. Like you could kind of like argue that it was within the framework, even though it favored the Republicans. This map is like clearly partisan gerrymandered and is not compact in many seats. So it really is illegal, but it probably is not going to get struck down because Republicans have unanimous control of the Supreme Court of Florida. But Florida has redistricted, and Republicans will probably gain. In a normal year, they gain 4. This year, they might gain maybe like 1 to 3. So we'll see how it plays out.
Hmm. All right. Yep. I remember now. I remember this. You think I follow this? I run this show, and you think I would follow this, but redistricting is so complicated. I don't get around to it. So, okay, yeah, yes, let's transition to the House. I was kind of thinking before Virginia was struck down, we were looking at a similar margin to 2018, which would have been 235 to 200, or maybe a little bit less. Now I'm thinking more like 225 seats. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think probably in the mid 220s. If I had to give a range, I'd say like maybe 222 to 232 is probably like the most likely. Maybe 222 to 230. The betting markets on the House have like Democrats around 80%. Definitely dropped a lot since because like really in just in the last month, the Democrats got Virginia map struck down and the southern states redrew due to the Voting Rights Act being um, basically struck down. So Republicans have gained ground, but really the big thing with the House is a generic ballot, right? In 2024, Trump won by a point and a half nationally, and right now, the generic ballot average is at Democrats +7. So if they're losing on average 8.5 points in most districts, no amount of gerrymandering is going to overcome that, or at least not the amount of gerrymandering we've had this year would overcome that. So unless the Republicans start doing better in the generic ballot or do better in these specific races, which we really haven't seen any evidence of, and Democrats only need to flip a handful, even with redistricting, which again kind of cuts both ways. It's really just difficult to see Republicans winning these districts, which the districts that decide control of the House are still like the traditional competitive swing districts. They're just like a point or two. They're probably like 2 points redder than they were the districts that decided it in 2024. 1 to 2 points more Republican. So it's an advantage, but it's not. It's not going to make the difference if you're losing by a lot, which it appears that they are losing by a lot right now.
What are some swing districts that you're looking at? I was kind of looking at two because obviously I'm from Pennsylvania. Two that I was looking at were Pennsylvania's 7th congressional district, which is based in the Lehigh Valley, and Pennsylvania's 8th congressional district in Northeast Pennsylvania, which is a more Scranton-based and rural seat. So those were two kind of bellwether seats. So what others are you looking at?
Uh, I think so. There are a couple districts that I think are kind of like slam dunk pickups for the Democrats. Nebraska's second, where Don Bacon is retiring. That's kind of a clear pickup. It's just one of the few seats held by Republicans that voted for Harris. Another one would be Arizona's 6, which like voted for Trump by less than half a point. I think that's a pretty clear pickup opportunity. It also has a decent Hispanic population. In Pennsylvania, I would also mention the 10th district near Harrisburg. Scott Perry is very likely going to lose, I think. Um,
It
if
seems like each
Republicans win that district, they might win the House overall, which I don't think they're going to win that district.
It seems like each election, the Democrats talk about Scott Perry in Pennsylvania losing, and then he doesn't. But it does seem, just based off the top of my head, each time it gets closer and closer. And this guy, by the way, has, I believe he's been investigated by the FBI, among other things. So he is definitely controversial to say the least. And I'm also thinking Virginia's 2nd congressional district. That's another one to watch. And the reason I'm emphasizing districts on the East Coast is because these seats are early in the night. So if they're swinging a certain way, then you'll kind of know, as opposed to seats that are on the West Coast.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then there's 2 seats in North Carolina, which I think are toss ups, but if the Democrats win them, they are like definitely winning control of the House. The reason they're toss-ups is because the House itself is not a toss-up. So that would be the North Carolina's first district, which has a Democratic incumbent who was targeted by redistricting. His seat is not completely unwinnable, but it got noticeably more Republican. So if he holds on to that, his old district was actually still won by Donald Trump, but it was closer than it is now. So if he still wins, that would be a good night for Democrats. And then on the other side of the state, near Asheville, in the western part of North Carolina, the 11th district is held by Republican. It's a seat that voted for Trump by, I believe, about 9 points. So decently Republican. But again, remember, if we're going from Trump plus 1.5 to Democrats plus 7, if something roughly like that materializes, you would think that could be pretty close. And the incumbent there has had a sexual harassment scandal, which is obviously not going to help him. So I think that's another toss-up district. One of the reasons I mentioned that is because North Carolina is first of all, is one of the first states to close polls, and they count pretty quickly. So those would be interesting. I think another one in Pennsylvania that I don't think is really a toss-up. I think the Republicans are favored would be the first district in Bucks County. Brian, that's one of the other Harris districts that is held by a Republican, one of very few. And so if Brian Fitzpatrick loses, that would be a sign of a big Democratic wave. Like maybe they would get to 235 seats, like in 2018, if they can flip that one. And then I think the eighth district, like you mentioned, is really a toss up. I think that one is a pretty close one. While the seventh was again a very like a narrow Trump seat, I think by about like 2 points. So if the Democrats are not winning that one, then they're in serious jeopardy of losing the House. So I think the seventh and the 10th are probably the Democrats' best bets in Pennsylvania.
Hmm. And I also will say with because I actually worked in Bucks County, where Ryan Fitzpatrick is in office. Obviously, Democrats don't like him. Their candidate is Bob Harvey. He's not a very electrifying figure, so I don't think they're going to win that seat. Democrats believe they will. They believe they have the energy, but don't think that is definitely, as you said it. I don't think that is a bellwether seat. I think if the Democrats do win that seat, then that would be a big deal, and they would be on track. But if they lose, that's also not a big problem.
Yeah. And then I guess the last thing I'll mention quickly, and maybe we can transition into the Senate with this, is Texas has, I would say, five interesting districts on the southern border that border Mexico or are near there. Uh, these districts were targeted in redistricting. One of them didn't really change, but it was gerrymandered before. And if Democrats in 2025, we saw Democrats like completely reverse the 2024 gains that Trump made with Hispanic voters. And so if we see that continue to reverse, three of them are held by Democrats, two by Republicans, but obviously the whole thing has been kind of shaken up by redistricting. We could potentially see Republicans lose some more seats in this area than they started with. So that's another area to watch if Democrats are having a good night, at least with Hispanic voters. Is there's about five districts in the south of Texas that are, I think all majority Hispanic. That could be in trouble. Two of them have Democratic incumbents who I think at this point is pretty clearly are favored, given that Democrats are recovering with Hispanic voters. And part of the reason I say is A, polling is showing this, and B, in 2025, the races we had, um, the Democrats did even better than 2020 in some cases with Hispanic voters. So in a blue midterm, it seems that the Democrats are going to erase the Republican gains with Hispanic voters. After that, we'll see what happens. But it looks for this year that kind of problem is being alleviated. So that is kind of like also a redistricting affected mess in Texas with those Hispanic seats. So if Democrats are doing well, they might be able to flip actually some Republican seats there.
Yeah, nice. And also, I'll put people on something on people's radar. There's supposed to be a special election in Texas's 23rd congressional district. I don't know. Nobody knows when it is going to be. I suspect it won't be until November at this point. But that was one of the many people who has been accused of sexual harassment, and he was forced out of office. Whatever his name was, Tony Gonzalez.
Tony Gonzalez, and yeah, the candidate who was like his opponent in the primary is pretty far right. This is a double-digit Trump seat. I think it's like 14 points. It's been going up because of the Hispanic voters. But if it comes back and people don't like that new candidate, it could be a little bit dicey. I don't think there's really not going to be a special election. There will probably just be like it held in November, like with the regular one.
Hmm.
Um, So we'll have to see about that one. I think that that would also be like a reach seat for if Democrats are winning that one. They're doing really well. They're probably winning some other double-digit Trump seats and cleanly winning the House by a wide margin.
Hmm. I was hoping they would hold that election sooner because I would think if they did hold that special election earlier in the year, I actually think Democrats would win the seat just because if it was a standalone election where turnout is low, Democratic energy is high, then maybe they could flip it. And I would say it probably would, but that doesn't look like that's going to happen. So they're missing out on an opportunity there, I guess.
Yeah, I tend to agree that Democrats would have been favored to win that. It probably would have been close, but in special elections, especially like you said, when turnout is lower, the Democrats right now are doing well because they have kind of the energy, and also the higher turnout voters tend to lean Democratic, at least this year and in the
Mhm.
last 2 to 4 years, I'd say.
Seems like it. All right. I guess we'll transition to the Senate, where we had some big news out of Texas most recently, and then Louisiana a couple of weeks ago. Louisiana, obviously, Bill Cassidy, he lost his seat. We still don't know who the Republican nominee will be. Probably Julia Letlow. Obviously, that's a safe seat, so that's not a big deal. But Texas is not a safe seat.
Yeah. So Republicans nominated Ken Paxton. He won by a wide margin, much wider than expected. The last minute Trump endorsement surely helped that. I think Paxton won by about 28 points. He won effectively every county except Travis County, which is Austin. Cornyn even lost Dallas by a narrow margin, which was shocking. He did very well in Dallas in the first round of the primary. Uh, but this is kind of in the pattern of the Trump endorsed candidates just win the Republican primaries. But Ken Paxton has a ton of scandals. He was impeached by the Republican state house of Texas, so he's got problems. And with the generic ballot being what it is, Texas is not deep red. It's light red, but it's not deep red. And so there's an opening here for the Democrats who have an okay candidate. I wouldn't call him great. His name's James Talarico. He's, I would say, a little bit weaker than Beto O'Rourke, who was the candidate in 2018, but he's not like a bad candidate. He's just kind of like a generic Democrat, which is not the worst thing in the world. So
He
that's going to be a dicey one for
It
Republicans.
it will be. I mean, James Tallarico, though, he is you going back to what you're saying, and not a strong candidate. I mean, he is, I guess, what you call a Jesus freak. I don't know if do people still use that anymore. I don't know if anyone still says that, but he's then again, so is Ken Paxton. But uh, Tallarico was saying things like God is non-binary, that there's six sexes and or genders, and he was apologizing for being white. So he's definitely not. I think he's not the right candidate for Texas. But here we are. Jasmine Crockett would have been worse. So I guess they did the best they
Yeah.
could.
Yeah, this is kind of like a side note, but Colin Allred, who ran in 2024 against Ted Cruz, and he didn't win, but he did well, competed 5 points better than Harris did. So if he ran again this year, but because he's also from Dallas and he's also black, when Crockett entered the race, that kind of crowded him out, and so he dropped out and ended up running for the House seat that he held a few years ago. So he's gonna be back in Congress. But if he had been nominated, I think there would be a clear vision that Democrats are going to win Texas this year. But I think as of now, given that Democrats have an okay candidate, but Harrison, Biden, and Clinton weren't great candidates either, and they put up better performances in Texas than in past years because it's shifted blue. So I think this is really the toss up race of the cycle in Texas just because we have the big blue wave against a red leaning state and a really bad candidate. And so I think the pieces are there for the Democrats to flip it for the first time in a long time, but it's never easy. So I think this is really the toss up seat of the cycle in Texas.
Agreed, agreed. And I would say at this point it's still very early, but I would say Democrats are probably slightly favored to win this one, assuming things stay the way they are. But obviously, it's definitely a toss-up.
Yeah, and another interesting thing about Texas is that the partisan lean of the state has stayed relatively consistent since 2016. So it trended blue by like 9 points between 2012 and 2016 because Trump did so poorly with both suburban and non-white voters in 2016. But since then, it's kind of been a mixed bag. It stayed consistently about 11 points more Republican than the popular vote. And it was similar to that in 2018 as well. But we've kind of seen there's been a lot of under the hood changes. We've seen uh, Republicans gaining a lot with Hispanics, but Democrats gaining a lot with suburban voters, especially white and wealthy suburban voters and educated suburban voters. So, if Democrats are doing a lot better with Hispanic voters, which it appears is happening, that'd be a big deal in Texas. And if they can kind of combine the gains with each group, who there are a lot of people in Texas who have voted for both parties in the past 8 years. I think probably maybe more than most states in the country, at least for federal races. So that's kind of a big vulnerability for Republicans that, yeah, it leans Republican a lot, but there's a lot of swing voters, it appears like, compared to a state like Georgia or South Carolina, where it's usually just the steady white vote versus the black vote, and it's mostly about turnout. Texas has a lot of swing voters, and so I think there's a real vulnerability here for a candidate like Paxton, who is pretty much as bad as they get, and we've seen bad candidates hurt Republicans a lot in the past 4 years. So I tend to agree that if I had to pick, Talarico is the slight favorite, but I think it's really a toss-up overall.
To go back into history a little bit, I was doing this earlier. Trump endorsed all of these candidates, and they all lost. So we have in 2018 we had Lou Barletta in Pennsylvania, he lost. We have Jim Renacci in Ohio, he lost in 2018. Matt Rosendale, he lost in 2018, and then more recently Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, he lost. Blake Masters in Arizona, he lost, and Kerry Lake, also in Arizona, lost. So uh, Trump candidates, they especially in swing states during midterm years, do not do very well sometimes.
Yeah, 2022 is kind of the peak example. There's also Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania and Herschel Walker in Georgia, who, if you actually look at how people voted for other races, it's like one interesting way that you can kind of get a feel for how the state voted, like independent of candidates, is to take the popular vote for all the House districts in the state and combine them. And Pennsylvania and Georgia were actually both Republican in 2022, and yet the Republican Senate candidates lost because they were so unpopular in these swing states. And that was true in, I believe, Arizona as well with Kerry Lake. At least that was for governor, and Blake Masters for Senate. So there's been a lot of problems with these Trumpy candidates, and they're clearly not popular. Trump has kind of been able to sort of has a unique effect, I guess, in presidential years and with low turnout voters. But it's really kind of the penalty is clear, and with a blue wave clearly on the horizon, it's not. It doesn't need to be a huge gap, like maybe a 3 to 4 point, um, candidate effect would probably flip Texas. Alaska, which we can maybe talk about next, is kind of in a similar boat where it's not so much the Republican weakness, but the Democrats have a very strong candidate in Mary Peltola, and that's looking vulnerable, even though it's another double-digit Trump seat.
At this point, I expect Mary Peltola to win, unless things change. But she is a very strong candidate. Democrats, the last time they won a Senate race in Texas was in 1988, and the last time they won a Senate race in Alaska was in 2008. Although that was kind of a special case because of Obama and the Ted Stevens was in a corruption scandal, I believe, at the time, which he was later acquitted of, but not before the election. So winning a Senate race in Alaska would be a big deal. But like many states, Alaska has trended blue, although it's still a Republican state, but they have a very strong candidate, Mary Peltola.
Yeah, I think to kind of zoom out, I would say the four, closest or most toss-up races of this cycle would be Alaska, Texas, Ohio, and Maine. I think North Carolina has kind of gone off the board. That's held by retiring Republican Tom Tillis, but the former governor just a few years ago, Roy Cooper of North Carolina, is running, and really he's running away with it. We're likely to see a pretty healthy margin of victory there. The Republicans are kind of giving up. North Carolina is definitely going to flip Democratic, and Georgia is going to be a Democratic hold as well. Republicans are struggling there, and from what I hear, they still have to have a runoff, but the Republican candidates for Senate are not that great. So those are likely going to hold. There's some, to go like in a slightly more competitive category, Michigan. If Republicans nominated the radical candidate. There's a three-way primary. Abdul El Sayed. Um, I think that maybe could be a problem seat. Michigan's still a much more competitive state than some of the bluer states like Virginia or New Jersey or something like that, where a flawed candidate could maybe get over the line. Michigan definitely a lot tougher. Um, but it's really unclear who's winning that primary. So I think we're just gonna have to see. I don't think it's till August actually. So that's a little bit up in the air. But Michigan in this environment is definitely blue leaning. So I think the default expectation would be that Michigan will stay Democratic for now. And then Iowa for Republicans, it's got about a similar partisan lean to Alaska and Texas, but Republicans have a much stronger candidate, sitting House Rep Ashley Hinson. I think the Democrats are going to win the governor's race in Iowa, but Senate is a different ballgame. And I think this is, unless it's a big blue wave, like a huge blue wave, I think that Iowa is most likely sticking with the Republicans. So the two I would say next kind of marquee races would be Ohio and Maine.
Yeah, I mean, we have, unfortunately, to my dismay, Graham Plattner will be the nominee in Maine. He's the guy with the tattoos. And my argument has always been people on the left, they love Graham Plattner. I don't get it. I think it's because he's like Mondami and Trump in his politics, but you think about all the problems he has. He literally has things on his body that are problems. And what are the skeletons in the closet about him that we don't know about and we won't know about until 2 weeks before the election? But it certainly seems like I was very badly burned in 2020 because it seemed like Susan Collins was a goner, and all the polling said that, and she won very easily. So I'm very skeptical of polling now, especially in Maine, but it does seem like everything is going against Susan Collins this time around.
Yeah, I mean it's a tougher situation than 2020, just because it's such a blue environment. And in 2020, I will say, it was the first real race Susan Collins had ever had that was like competitive. So, sometimes the first time a senator faces a tough race, they might not lose, but the second time they might be able to get them. Uh, and secondly, people were more willing to vote Republican down ballot because it was kind of accepted that Biden was a clear favorite in the presidency. So people were more willing to vote for Republican congressmen if they felt like they knew a Democrat was going to be president. But in a big blue wave, Maine is going to be a very blue state, so it's not an easy climb for Susan Collins. And I think the fair statement would be that she's a slight underdog, but it's still competitive. I mean, Plattner actually had another scandal today. We're recording this on Saturday,
Saturday.
and he had another scandal about, I believe, like sexting other people. He's married. That just came out from the New York Times. I'm sure there will be more because there's always been more every time a new one comes out. So I mean, this is the Democrats' Ken Paxton basically. The only difference is that Maine is bluer than Texas is red, at least in this environment. But Susan Collins is no pushover. So like, it wouldn't shock me if we find a scenario where Democrats lose control of the Senate potentially, because of Graham Plattner being such a terrible candidate. So that's a kind of a thorn in the Democrats' side. The governor of Maine, Janet Mills, dropped out of the race because she was losing in the primary. So I guess the voters really like him, for whatever reason. God knows why.
People on the left, they love him. Like if you're like on the Bernie Sanders left or even just the center left, people love him. I don't get it. He's
Yeah,
I,
I don't get
I
it
think
either.
it's
It's
just Janet
basically the
Mills.
Democratic version of Trump and Paxton and the far right. So I don't know why people keep voting for these candidates, but here we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, another thing Janet Mills faces is she was very old. She's 77 years old. She would have been, you
Yeah.
think about it, you add 6 years, she would have been in her mid 80s by the time the end of her first term. And these guys, they always say, "Oh, well, I'll only run for one term." Yeah, right. I don't think anyone's ever followed through on that. So she could have very easily been a senator in her 90s.
Yeah, I think that was probably the most like valid concern against Mills, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think this is just going to be a pain for the Democrats. I mean, it's such a blue state. I think that, it's kind of tough to say that Collins is favored, but you can never counter out just because she has a strong history, and the Democrats have such a bad candidate. So
Hmm.
I think that one's going to be trouble, regardless of how big of a blue wave it is, just because the candidates still do matter to an extent. And then,
She's such a big beast in that state. I mean, it
yeah,
will be a big deal if she loses.
yeah, and it's a small state too. I will say small states are kind of easier to see more good candidate effects. Texas is huge, and half the people aren't even from Texas, so it's kind of different. Where, like, maybe Ken Paxton doesn't have as big of an impact there, even though it certainly will be an impact. Whereas like a really strong candidate like Peltola in Alaska or Collins in Maine kind of can see more crossover appeal. And like West Virginia and Montana were like some of the last states to have Democratic senators despite being safely Republican because they're smaller states. So the last interesting race is Ohio. I think the Republicans are slightly favored for this one, although it's definitely pretty close. One of the reasons I think, even though Ohio is technically a little bit bluer than Texas and Alaska, that the Republicans are favored here is that the Democratic gains are looking to be mostly with the places that they lost in 2024, which would be minority voters and young voters. They kind of did really poorly in urban areas that were traditionally Democratic, and it looks like they've kind of like fixed that problem, or at least I think one reason is that a lot of it had to do with the economy under Biden, and since Trump has really just thrown fuel on the fire and not really fixed much, they're kind of sort of reverting and having a backlash in favor of Democrats. We'll see. We'll have to see how it plays out in the future. We can't know that for sure yet. But in 2026, it looks like Democrats are making a huge gain and recovery with minority voters, which helps a lot more in a place like Texas or North Carolina than it does in like Ohio. Ohio is a lot more like a rural white state. So they do have a strong candidate, Sherrod Brown, who's the senator who lost narrowly in 2024. So he's got a real shot because, I mean, it was close in 2024 and Democrats are doing a lot better nationally. But I think one thing that people might be underestimating is that he also had a bad, like, Trump endorsed candidate in 2024. And this year, the appointed senator is kind of a nobody, which really isn't the worst thing these days, especially in a Republican leaning state. So I think that it's going to be a competitive race, but I think that the Republicans might retain the slight edge in Ohio.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, and I'll also say this is the home of the Vice President JD Vance. So I mean, y- you might think Ohio voters they might want to give the president a kicking or the vice president kicking, but maybe not. I don't. I think it could be a close race, but not one that Democrats will be able to win. And also, and I would say that Democrats that this really isn't a race worth winning because this seat is a special election, so it will be up again in 2 years.
Yep, that's a big point. I guess the one thing that it would matter a lot for is like the Republican ability to appoint new Supreme Court justices before the next election. That's probably the biggest impact because, yeah, I think it's difficult to imagine Brown winning re-election in 2028. Even yeah, I think it's fair to expect that Democrats are going to do better in 2028 than they did in 2024, or at least most likely, more likely than not. But even so, it's kind of hard to imagine him winning in a presidential year since to win this year it would basically be everything going right, and maybe he'd win by like a point or two. So yeah, it's one of the less consequential races on the map, I would say. But I mean, it still does matter for certain things. So, and it probably will be competitive. So it will be competitive. So that's probably the last one to keep your eye on, at least for Senate control this year. And so, kind of with those four races, if you put Alaska, Texas, Ohio, and Maine as toss up, you would get 49 seats, or sorry, 48 seats for the Republicans and 48 for the Democrats. So the Senate is looking pretty close to a toss up this year. I think probably most likely you would see 51-49 either way, or 50-50. Again, kind of as I went through individually, if I had to pick, I'd probably give Maine, Texas, and Alaska to the Democrats and Ohio to the Republicans, which would be a 51-49 Democratic majority. But again, it's really not too hard to see, Democrats coming up just short in Texas or Susan Collins pulling it out. So, it's far from a guarantee, mostly due to the just the states that are up this year. But the Senate is much more competitive than it looked early on last year when, Republicans weren't losing so badly nationally. But in a blue wave, you will see red seats flip. The only question is how many at this point.
It's amazing. I think we did a brief look ahead back at the 2024 election 18 months ago, actually, and we were saying Republicans would probably retain control of the Senate. I think nobody anticipated, including many Trump voters, just how bad things would be. And here we are. I think the only thing I was saying, I remember at the beginning of this year, I was saying there's two things that Republicans still they're still benefiting from that haven't gone wrong yet. We're not at war, and that there's no recession. Well, we are now at war, and there could be a recession because of the war. So, and both of which would be very bad. So, yeah, and I guess the only other Senate race I would bring up is Georgia. That is obviously John Ossoff is likely to win that seat. It appears.
Yeah, I think I touched on it briefly, but like uh Democrats are doing well in Georgia and they had better even though they didn't really have that competitive of primaries, they outvoted the Republicans. This is also true in Texas, by the way, where both sides had competitive primaries. More Democrats voted in the primary in Texas than Republicans voted in the primary in Texas, which is notable because it's usually Republican by a clear margin. And Georgia also was Democratic. North Carolina was Democratic. I think Ohio was like 51% Republican or like less or something like that. It was really close, but Republicans did come ahead in Ohio, which I think might be it's an indicator of turnout. It doesn't tell you exactly how the races are going to go, but it's relevant. But yeah, I think Ossoff is not getting that strong of a challenge. There was some thought that Brian Kemp could run. He's the governor of Georgia. He's not that moderate, but he's not a full-on Trump person. He like supported certifying the 2020 election, and Trump tried to get him ousted from office in 2022, which didn't work. So if he had ran, it probably would have been more competitive. Although with the year shaping out to be as blue as it is now, I still kind of don't think he would have won. If the generic ballot ends up being like the polls are right now. So I think Georgia is really not a key race this cycle, even if it might be during like a presidential race. I think if the Democrats are losing Georgia, they're losing shockingly badly. That would
Mhm.
be a big surprise to me.
Yeah, and that's what I thought. And the only other thing I wanted to bring up was Nebraska. They obviously the Democrats are. I don't think are they fielding a candidate this year. It's not
I
really.
There was some legal action about it. I think as of now they are not.
Yeah, it's they're running an independent in this election, but they did that last time. I don't think that's necessarily going to work. I really think what they should be doing is they should stop doing this in red states. They need to be doing this in more leaning red states. Like doing that in Ohio might have been a good idea. They might have doing an independent leaning Democrat instead of doing this in a really ruby red state.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Iowa would have been an even better candidate to do something like that because I mean, it's kind of hard. A former senator is a pretty strong candidate in Ohio. I don't know if they could have done much better than that, but I think like Iowa would have been an interesting case.
Yeah, I just mean in
Um,
general, not even in
Yeah,
just.
yeah, I know what you mean. Like, I mean, we probably will see it. We saw it in Utah in 2022, and I was surprised at how close Evan McMullen, who was kind of like a Democratic aligned independent, did in Utah in what was a Republican leaning year, although it was not a Republican wave in Utah. I think he lost by single digits. So yeah, I mean, it kind of is an effective strategy, but I don't think it's going to work in Nebraska. The senator this time is also a stronger senator than the other one, Deb Fisher in 2024. So I think this would be another big surprise, even a bigger surprise than Iowa or Ohio for sure. If the independent Democrat actually won this one.
Yep, I'm thinking so. And I did look. Apparently, Democrats are fielding a candidate. It looks like it's going to be a no name. So, um,
I think I could be wrong, but so there is a like Republican Democrat. It was an interesting situation. There was a Republican supporting Democrat in the Democratic primary who like supported the current senator, and then there was a Democrat in the primary who like kind of said without saying that he was going to drop out. I mean, I think it might have been a woman actually, that she was going to drop out to let Osborne run alone against the Republican. And so I think that lady won.
Yeah,
And so I
Cindy
think they
Burbank.
technically have a candidate, but she's going to drop out, I believe is the idea.
Yeah, yep. And I guess another problem with this is when one flaw with the strategy is if you have the Democrats not run and they instead endorse an independent, they're basically a Democrat. So that's
Yeah.
kind of one flaw with that strategy. But if you let a Democrat run, then you split the vote and the Republican wins anyway. So it's not a perfect strategy. It has yet to actually win. I think, as I said, I think they do need to try it in a state like Iowa, or if it wasn't for this year, Ohio. Maybe in even South Carolina might not be a bad idea. It's obviously a more safe state, but it's not as safe as, say, Nebraska or
Yeah, I
Utah.
mean, maybe Kansas. Kansas is a little bit bluer than Nebraska. I mean, in 2020, Democrats made a push for Kansas and South Carolina. I don't really think either of those are on the board yet. I don't.
Agreed.
It would take kind of an act of God for Republicans to lose those seats. So that would maybe be a state where it might work a little bit better. Like Lindsey Graham is obviously not that popular in South Carolina. Like we'll probably see these states be closer just because it's such a blue wave, but I don't think either. I don't think there are any. I don't think any Senate races other than the ones we mentioned are at really any risk, and that includes Florida, which we did not mention. I think that's a safe seat for Ashley Moody, who's a strong Republican senator who was appointed because Marco Rubio was appointed Secretary of State. So I really don't. I really think the ones we mentioned are the playing field for the Senate this time.
And then I guess before we moved on, I just saw this article here. Apparently there is a second Dan Sullivan running in Alaska. Are you aware of this?
Yeah, I heard about that. I guess they haven't held the primary yet. Alaska uses ranked choice voting, and they also don't do primaries. So honestly, we're just gonna have to wait and see for that one. It probably won't. I could see it hurting or helping like slightly either way, but like people aren't that stupid. They'll like either like I believe there are party labels, so like they should be able to figure it out. I think. Um, but yeah, I did see that. I guess it's like a kind of like a trying to confuse people campaign. I don't know who it was designed by. I guess maybe the Democrats were kind of in favor of that. But yeah, I don't know who that guy is or what his deal is. But
Yeah, I mean, his name's also Dan James Sullivan, and he's running against Senator Dan Sullivan. So definitely, it looks like it is linked to a progressive consultant. So obviously, something that Democrats were involved in. So that's interesting. I just saw this right now. The things you see that break on a Saturday afternoon. So I guess lastly is the governor's race in California. Obviously, this is not competitive in the traditional sense as if Democrat versus Republican, but it is competitive in a different sort of way. I did just see a poll from, I believe it was Emerson, and apparently it had that poll showed two Democrats advancing to the runoff, and that would be Javier Becerra and Tom Steyer. But there was another poll that was done by I believe, the University of California, where it had Becerra advancing and Steve Hilton, who, by the way, is actually worked for British Prime Minister David Cameron. So he's not even like a longtime American, but he is the Republican candidate. So one of them. So it looks like we're going to see either Becerra versus Hilton or a Becerra versus Steyer race.
yeah, I mean Steyer versus Hilton isn't impossible either. That's probably like the last possible combination. Um, it looks like Becerra versus I think the most likely outcome is Becerra versus Hilton.
Agreed.
Like the Republicans were thinking that they were going to lock out the Democrats, which was always a short-sighted thing. I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast or not, but the reason that wasn't going to happen was because the undecided voters in the polls were Democrats, so they were not going to vote for uh, Hilton or Bianco, the other Republican who has kind of fallen by the wayside since Trump endorsed Hilton. So I think I think Becerra is the favorite to probably get first place. Um, and I guess I think if I had to pick, I would say Hilton gets second place, but Steyer is in the game, and maybe Steyer could finish first. We just don't know for sure, but we do know that a Democrat will be governor of California. I guess if they get locked out, if the Republicans don't have a candidate, it maybe could get a little weird. Like there's one competitive House race in California, incumbent House rep David Valadao, he represents a seat that was redrawn to be closer. It technically voted for Trump, but if you held the result in 2024, he probably would have lost. And so we certainly expect him to lose in this year, but it's a competitive-ish race, a competitive race. So if the Republicans don't get a governor candidate, then you have to think that he's in even more trouble just because the turnout will be lower among Republicans. But yeah, I think Becerra versus Hilton is my bet for who's going to advance.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. Becerra is he worked in the Biden administration. They're all very very dull candidates, even the Republican ones. I'm not surprised if this is such a fragmented race. It's very dull. I mean, obviously Eric Swalwell dropping out was not good for Republicans, but if you think about it, for Republicans to advance, two of them, even if on a good year, if they got like 40% of the vote, 41% of the vote combined, that would be really like tippy tops. Like getting more than that would
I
be
would be
great.
surprised if they got that much this year because
Yeah,
it's a blue
exactly.
wave
And
as
I
well.
that's what I mean in a good year, even if it was
Yeah,
40%. And it's probably gonna be more like 35%. So even if you split it 40%, 2020, one of the Democrats is almost certainly going to get more than 20% at this point.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. A Republican lockout is A, was never going to happen, and B, is definitely not going to happen because Trump endorsed Hilton. So he's going to get more votes than the other Republicans. So they're not going to split it evenly. So
And in
I
my
I
opinion,
think
that's a missed opportunity, but oh well.
yeah. Well, yeah, I don't think it was ever going to happen, but that certainly sealed the deal for sure.
I didn't think it was going to happen either. I held out hope, but and I'm only because Democrats in California have run the state the last 15 years very badly. So it would have been nice to see things change a little bit, but I guess not. So that race is going to be on June the 2nd, which will be tomorrow because this episode comes out on June the 1st. So it will be tomorrow, a few days away for us. So I believe that is everything. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the state since the redistricting is done, at least it looks like it. I think the stage is pretty much set, and that's kind of where we're looking, and then we'll see if anything changes between now and November. I guess a couple last things I kind of like to note about the generic ballot, which is kind of the most important number for any midterm. Uh, in 2025, if you took the governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia, if you kind of take at face value those races, you would have gotten a generic ballot of Democrats plus 7.5. That's a kind of that's a rough estimate because it's not a perfect comparison a governor's race, but that does line up roughly with the generic ballot polling we're seeing, which is around Democrats plus 7. And I would also note that since 2025, if you had to say, I think we would certainly say things have gotten worse for Trump. And that has been the case both in the polling and in his approval rating and with kind of the events like the war and the gas prices and stuff. So it certainly doesn't look like things are getting better since then. And historically, the out of power party has gained as you get closer to the election because the undecided voters tend to disapprove of the president, which is certainly true since his approval rating is like 39%. So Republicans are going to get more than 39% of the vote for sure. But that means the undecided voters, if it's like, 52 Democrat, 45 Republican, and they're undecided voters, those undecided voters basically all disapprove of Trump. So the Democrats will tend to more likely than not improve as time goes on. So if they continue to do so, I think we'll definitely see Democrats win a lot of these competitive seats we talked about.
Exactly. I mean, I'm looking back to 2006, which I think would be the most comparable midterm. Not even 2018 might be as well.
I,
Democrats
I
won
would
a
say
couple.
2018. 2018 is fair.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats in 2006 they won by 8%. They gained 31 House seats. Obviously, we're not expecting a gain of 30, and the most reason for that is because Democrats back in 2006 they had, as I'm looking this up right now, they had 201 seats before the election. They actually have 200 and they have 212 or 213 right now. So even if they gain 20, they would still be on 2006 levels. And actually, they won in that election 52.3% to 44.3%.
Yeah, and 2018 was about Democrats plus 7.5 as well. So you could say that was like the same as 2025. which was obviously a blue wave. So I mean, if we see basically the similar level of results as 2018, we would probably see, the Senate being really, really close, probably coming down to like a few points in Texas, maybe Ohio, maybe Alaska, and then we would see the House going blue by a comfortable margin. Maybe not. It almost certainly wouldn't be as many seats, I think, because of the gerrymandering. In 2018, there was certainly gerrymandering, but it wasn't as neat as it is now, for a number of reasons that it would take a whole nother podcast to explain. The maps are such that it's harder for either side to win a huge majority this year. So I think the number of seats might not be the best metric, but Democrats are certainly well favored for control of the House.
Agreed as well. And I'm looking at the Senate, and they gained in 6 seats. So that was not expected. Democrats were not expected to take control of the Senate in 2006, and they did. So maybe we're gonna get we're gonna get something similar this election.
Yeah, it's possible.
And the reason,
2018, it was kind of like said that Republicans didn't do that. Republicans did better than expected by gaining seats in the Senate, but I believe the seats that they gained were North Dakota, which is like Republican plus 35, Missouri and Indiana, which are like Republican plus 15 to 20, and then Florida, which it was a little bit early in its phase, but has become like a Republican plus 10 seat state or so. So they gained a few in red states, but they also lost most of the swing states by like between like 5 and 15 points. So the map is not great for the Democrats this year, but it's not as bad as 2018. So even if we saw a similar result to 2018, the Democrats might win the Senate. So it's very much on the table.
mm, exactly. Well, all right. I guess that will be it for this episode. Thanks for coming as always, and we'll definitely have you back before the midterm elections in November, which are 4 months away. No, 5 months away. I can't wait for these to be over. They're 5 months away. So, all right. And as always, everybody, please, if you like this, like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.